The United States is the world's most enduring example of democracy. In this moment, the nation confronts historic challenges and opportunities for governance and engagement. Stories in Democracy, in partnership with Snow Isle Libraries and the Daily Herald, explores the issues facing our communities and the future of democracy through a series of personal conversations with the congressional representatives of Snohomish and Island counties.
Welcome to Stories in Democracy, a partnership between Snow Isle Libraries and the Daily Herald. I'm Lois Langer-Thompson, the Executive Director of Snow Isle Libraries. Joining me is John Bauer, the editorial page editor of the Daily Herald newspaper. Together, we will discuss the future of our American democracy and representative government and explore opportunities for governance and engagement as the nation confronts historic challenges. Our guest today is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who is now serving her third term in Congress, representing Washington's 7th Congressional District, which includes Edmonds, Shoreline, Seattle, Burien, and Normandy Park. She is the first South Asian American woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative Jayapal was born in India, grew up in India, Indonesia, and Singapore, and came to the United States by herself at the age of 16 to attend college at Georgetown University. She later received her MBA from Northwestern University, worked in a number of industries in both the public and private sector, and has authored 2 books. Thank you for joining us, Congresswoman Jayapal.
Thank you, Lois, and thank you to Snow Isle Libraries and also to the Daily Herald. It's great to be with you.
Good to be with you again. Congresswoman, we want to start in a very basic question, and I'd like to ask you just how you got here. What in your background led you to being a member of Congress?
It's really a remarkable story, and sometimes I pinch myself every day when I retell it to myself, where I see the nameplate in Congress when I walk into my office. But, you know, I came to this country at the age of 16 by myself. I'm an immigrant. I'm the proud daughter of parents who believed that the United States was the place that I was going to get the best education and the most opportunity. And they sacrificed everything, not just money. They had $5,000 in their bank account when they sent me here by myself, but also the idea that I would potentially never live on the same continent as them, that they would send their 16-year-old across the ocean. And in fact, that's what's happened. We have never lived on the same continent since I was 16. They still live in India. And I think it was that emphasis on education and opportunity that I was fortunate enough to get, the American dream, if you will, that made me feel so committed to giving back. And initially that was in terms of social justice as an organizer, working on immigrant rights, forming the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Washington state, working on international development for 10 years with a locally based organization, now global organization called PATH. But then ultimately seeing that for policy to really be reflective of our democracy, more of us, women, people of color, immigrants, needed to serve in elected office. And so I ran for the state Senate in 2014. I became the only woman of color in the state Senate at the time, and then ran for Congress in 2016 and became the first woman to represent the district, one of only 79 women of color that have ever been elected to Congress in the history of our country. And I couldn't be more proud to represent this district and more humbled to have every day dedicated to making the lives of people better, because that is what I owe my parents. That's what I owe this country for giving me that opportunity, and that I owe the future generations, my kids, and other people's children, the opportunity to have that same American dream that I have that's become almost unattainable for so many Americans.
Thank you. Congresswoman, I found your story is inspirational, and we appreciate you sharing just a bit of it. And as you think about, I know one of your passions and your commitments is for immigrants. As you work daily and there's just the daily grind, how do you keep your hope and your enthusiasm and your commitment during your work every day?
Yeah, it's a really hard issue because it's a really great question because it's such a hard issue. And I feel like I've been working on it for 20 years and we haven't made the kind of progress that I want to see. And I think the way I get my hope and inspiration is the people that I organized with, the women and the men and the children that I have spent years organizing with, talking to, hearing their stories of refugees who came barefoot, traveled across Africa or across Latin America with no shoes, through war-torn countries, through drought, through economic hardship to get to the United States. And when you look at all of that hardship, what you actually see is resilience, courage. You see this commitment to waking up every day and continuing to do what you need to do to take care of your family and yourself and to contribute. And that is what I hold with me every day. One example of that is years ago as an activist, I led one of the largest civil disobedience protests in Washington, D.C. with 100 women. And we sat and we were pushing for immigration reform, and we had undocumented women. We had 3 generations in some cases, a grandmother, a mother, and a child. And it was a remarkable effort. And I just remember the resilience and the joy and the courage of those women as they took the ultimate risk of being arrested in nonviolent civil disobedience because they knew that if they didn't, their children would not be able to have a life. And that's what I take into every hearing with me. And when I get depressed, I think about those women in particular. And I think to myself, well, really, everything I'm facing is nothing compared to what they've faced. And then I get up and I do it all again and hopefully inspire other people to be involved as well.
Yeah, thank you. My grandfather was an immigrant, came in as a teenager, and I think we are often our ancestors' greatest dreams, and to continue to hold that. So thank you for that story as well.
That's
Back
beautiful.
to you, John.
Great. Congresswoman, so much of what gets done in Congress depends on the interaction between its members. I'll note that you're the chair of the Progressive Caucus for the Democrats. And I want to ask you how that contributes not only to your relations with Republicans, but your relations with more moderate members in the party.
Well, one of the things I'm most proud of is as chair of the Progressive Caucus, I've really focused on how do we recognize that so many of the things we fight for as progressives are actually also populist and popular. And so I've gone out of my way to build relationships with some of the most vulnerable Democrats in swing districts. We call them frontliners because they're on the front line in terms of elections. And you see that I've done that with Medicare expansion, working with Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, Jared Golden in Maine. These are people that ran and won in Trump districts and are actually on the same page as me, whether it's around a $15 minimum wage, whether it's around Medicare expansion, lowering the age of Medicare eligibility, or whether it's on making sure that we have a significant investment into home and community-based services, something that I fought for as chair of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force back in last summer. So I think that the divide is among Democrats is sometimes mischaracterized. Our work is really, we feel, popular and populist, and we have tried to build those bridges across the caucus. I think in terms of work with Republicans, I will tell you that January 6th and the last 4 years has made that work much, much more difficult. Mm-hmm. I always was looking for opportunities, whether it was in the state Senate or whether it was in Congress, to do bills in a bipartisan way. And I have a number of bills that are bipartisan. In fact, my antitrust bill and the entire antitrust package is bipartisan that we just passed in Judiciary Committee. I have a South Asian heart health bill that is with Joe Wilson, who is the person who yelled, "You lie," to President Obama. Never really thought that I would be working on something with Congressman Wilson, but he's been terrific to work with on this particular issue. So I try to find those opportunities, but I will say that now working with a party across the aisle that denies the legitimacy of our election, that denies the insurrectionists who came into the Capitol in the worst attack on the United States Capitol since the War of 1812, raising Confederate flags, pushing for some of us, for us to be killed as members of Congress, pushing for the vice president, Republican vice president, to be hanged and the Speaker of the House to be killed is very, very difficult. And so I don't believe in bipartisanship for bipartisanship's sake. I believe that we need to try to bring people to deliver results for the American people, but it is extremely difficult with a party that is no longer about values and principles, but has turned into a one-man cult that is more interested often in pushing forward ideas that simply do not comport with science or logic or even human kindness in any way, shape, or form. So we do what we can and we try, but at the end of the day, our goal has to be to deliver for people, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah. Well, you anticipated my next question, but I want to stick to the issue of bipartisanship for a moment. I'm wondering, do you find that that's a concern of when you talk with your constituents? Is that something that they're asking you that they feel they're telling you that they feel is important?
Well, it depends. I represent one of the most progressive districts in the country. And, and I think my constituents are incredibly frustrated with the lack of action from Congress. And sometimes people describe it to me as, why do Democrats bring a knife to a gunfight? I don't love the violent analogies, but I think that there is a feeling amongst many of my constituents, but also of constituents across the country, that we have to be more aggressive about fighting for what we can fight for in the moments when we have power. Because when you look at what the other side does, often they have eliminated the filibuster for the Republican tax scam that they passed a couple of years ago. But we are holding on to the idea of a filibuster, which in my mind is a racist Jim Crow legacy that is preventing people from moving forward on voting rights at a time when voting rights are being suppressed. So I think there is an ideal of bipartisanship that we all aspire to, including my constituents. But there is a bigger ideal of actually making progress on the massive questions that will frankly tear our country down if we don't address it. Racial inequity, economic injustice, concentration of wealth and power, and corporate monopolies. These are things that if we don't make progress on, it doesn't matter how much bipartisanship we have, we will have a deeply unequal country without the opportunity that was really identified in our Constitution and by our framers.
Building on that, you're right in the thick of it, you and your staff every day. And I wonder what your concerns are for democracy and representative government, and then how this time fits into the larger overall context of history. It's, sort of beyond the bipartisanship, but what about democracy and representative government? What are your concerns there?
Well, that is actually my deepest and most grave concern. I think that for a long time, we in America felt somewhat immunized against real attacks on democracy. I don't think anybody really thought that democracy was as fragile as we have come to see that it is. And so that fragility of democracy that we experienced over the last 4 years as things come out about what presidential overreaches, ways in which the corruption extended into every branch of government, where the presidential branch was doing things that wasn't even legislated or allowed by the Congress, but Congress wasn't told about those things, the ways in which executive powers were breached and utilized in corrupt manner. But then, of course, the culmination with the denial of the election results. And that was not an overnight thing. That started almost a year before with suggestions from the highest office of the land that the election was rigged. And then it continued all the way through the election and then into January 6th. And my firm belief is that that was a coordinated, planned attack on the Capitol with support from the highest levels of the land. And I think that we came back after that to certify the election, to make sure that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were certified as president and vice president. But the effect of the continuing divide in the country, the continuing lies around the election, just show how fragile democracy is. Now, you add to that the 400 voter suppression bills that have been passed by Republicans, passed or introduced by Republicans around the country, and you are now in a specific dark tunnel of how the United States no longer even wants everybody to vote. We actually want to try and suppress, or some people want to try and suppress the votes, particularly of Black and brown and poor people across the country. So it's a fragile time. And I think that each one of us has to recognize how interconnected that fragility is with economic wealth and racial wealth gaps in this country. I was really proud to have just been appointed by the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, to a special select committee on inequality and disparity in America. And I think that is deeply tied to, if we can't fix that, we already know there are many people in this country and outside of this country that want to see democracies fail. They would be much more comfortable with authoritarian regimes. And if we can't fix racial inequality and wealth inequality in America and income inequality in America, then we will just contribute to the idea that democracies do not allow all people to succeed and to have opportunity. So it is very deeply tied to a whole bunch of other things that I think we are working on trying to fix.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, thinking back to January and the certification of the election, that the courage and the fortitude we saw from members of Congress to go back in and do that work, it was inspirational to all of us to carry that work forward and to work on the many inequalities that you referred to, the wealth, the racial inequality. So carrying that forward. Thank you.
I want to kind of continue that conversation just as to where you see where you see the responsibility.
The beauty of working from home.
Yeah. Where you see the responsibilities for ourselves. I spend a lot of my time, especially during election season, encouraging everybody to vote and get their ballots in. But what do you see as the responsibility of U.S. citizens beyond voting?
Yeah, one of the things I'm most proud of is that I think this is still current. I haven't gotten the most recent data, but in the last two Congresses, I am so proud that my district sends the most emails, has the most calls, most letters of any congressional district in the country. And I try to encourage that. I was also the member who was elected across the country with the most votes of any member of Congress. And to me, that is about that personal responsibility, not only to vote, which I try to do everything I can, as you do, to encourage people to exercise that power. It is a power and it is a responsibility. Yeah. And it is
let me interrupt just a moment. Do those letters actually and emails, do they get read?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I get a report every week of all of the issues, all of the letters. They're tallied for me. I made it a practice early on to write at least 3, sometimes 5 personal handwritten letters back to constituents, because even though everything is automated now and, we do a lot of electronic correspondence, I personally love I'm a writer. I love the handwritten note. And so it absolutely, they get read. And I will tell you that the more effective ones are the ones that are not the campaign where, you get 1,200 emails that say the same thing, but the personal story, the mom who writes to me about what it meant for her to get her child tax credit check. The person who writes to me and tells me what is happening because their spouse can't get a visa to come and be with them and they've been separated for 5 years. Those are the stories that I then take and, with their permission, of course, use on the House floor, use in my conversations with people as I'm trying to convince them to do something that I want them to do. And I think rooting in that personal story makes a huge difference. So to anybody who's listening, it's fine if you want to sign a petition, if you want to, send a sort of a standard email. But the really important thing is to tell me your story, because I'm a believer in the power of story to change things. And so, yes, they do really make a difference. Now I've forgotten what your original question was. Oh, what can people do? So I think really being advocates with your personal story when it's possible. Sometimes it's just too painful and it's not possible, and we respect that as well. But to really recognize that you have power. Your voice is power, your story is power, and your action is power. And so the book that I recently wrote was called Use the Power You Have. We have power. It comes through the vote, and it comes through our advocacy, and it comes through our voice. So let's use that power and let's put it to work to make life better for millions of Americans.
That's you certainly have modeled that in your book and editorials you've written, where you have shared really personal stories and really have then given many women, many immigrants, hopefully all of your constituents, that empowering them as well. When you hear someone else tell their story, it's brave and risky, but it has certainly been valuable to our communities here. I wonder if you can share, along with the information you get from your constituents, where do you get your facts? Where do you find your information? We count on you to have good information. And so I think we're always interested in where you get your information from, who you turn to.
Yeah. And thank you, Lois, for mentioning, it has been a choice to share my own stories, whether it's about my trans kid or whether it's about my abortion, because I think that there's this sense out there that we as members of Congress aren't really human, and we don't have struggles, and we don't have challenges, and we don't have stories of our own. And it's uncomfortable sometimes because you don't want the focus to just be on you. But at the same time, I think it is a reflection of what so many other people are dealing with. And it is a powerful organizing tactic to tell our story so that others can feel that there is somebody who really understands, is human, and that they now also not only have somebody who can speak to this issue, but that they have power to be a part of that solution as well. So that's really important to me. I think in terms of where I get my information, I am an avid consumer of many different news sources, and I'm also an avid reader. And so I revel in both storytelling from a fictional place, which gives a lot of information, but also, of course, the data and the statistics of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, any number of news sites that I trust and that I feel like are rooted in science and data and research. And so, for me, one of the things I love about this job, if you were somebody who thought you knew everything, this is not really a good job for you, because we are dealing with so many things that are new. And I love the opportunity to talk to people who know what they're talking about and to learn. And I will give you an example of that. I am not somebody who doesn't mind, who is afraid of learning new things. And so when I first came to Congress, I sort of knew about antitrust, but I didn't know a lot of the details of it. I didn't understand the wonky policy behind it. I am a policy wonk. That's the other, good or bad thing is true about me. And when we embarked on a 16-month investigation in the House Antitrust Committee subcommittee, which I'm the vice chair of, I read every report. I talked to the experts. that were brought to me from universities. I listened to small business owners who talked about what it meant for them to not be able to compete with the big tech giants. And I really sought out information of all kinds, because I think all of it helps you to develop a well-developed sense of what is going on. And I just loved that ability to deep dive into an issue. So I try to find lots of different sources. I try to find stories that amplify what the problem is. I try to listen to different sides. If there's a disagreement, I want to hear what the disagreement is so that I can understand what my own perspective is, but from a well-reasoned and well-supported place.
You're speaking to a librarian's love language here, with lots of sources and checking sources and comparing notes. So I know we're getting ready to close out our time. I wonder, another librarian question, but are you recommending a book or a podcast that you'd like to share right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, there are so many, but I've had on my bookshelf that I love reading fiction because I get so much data and statistics that I like to keep my creative mind going. But I just finished Pachinko, which I've actually had on my shelves for a couple of years, but I really loved it. And so I highly recommend that. And I'm now reading a book by an Iranian-American writer, and I'm going to forget the name of it, but it's again a novel. But a lot of these novels have so much data and history in them that it's my escape. So I think that's been really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. I think you just sort of summed up why we called this Stories in Democracy, because the stories are what matter. Stories are what move us. Stories bring everything to life and are so important. Our personal story, our country's story. So we just want to thank you for your time today. It has been a delight and a pleasure to spend some time with you. And I know I'm going to walk away, and I know John as well, with lots to think about community building, the importance of community and strengthening our communities as we move forward. And we just appreciate your time and your leadership in the House. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much.